Good day, fellow captains, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Duca d'Asta, and for this ship, I'm using Francisco Mimbelli. There's a couple of reasons why, and we're going to go through that really quick. One of the reasons is that time to make a move, cruiser main battery reload time. It's kind of important when it comes to this ship's ability to get those SAP shells out a little bit faster, since with the SAP shells, when you choose that modification, generally speaking, your guns reload a little slower, so DPM is affected. But having Mimbelli on there does help at least a little bit. Just as a quick side note, I have found that having the SAP affect your reload time does affect your ability to do anything major in battle, especially when it comes to dealing with enemy cruisers that are rapid firing. It makes it harder to go toe to toe with, let's say, something like a rapid firing American cruiser like a Dallas or some such. Those types of ships, generally speaking, can keep fire on your ship at a pretty rapid rate, and choosing the SAP shell makes it so that is not something that's going to be in your bag of tricks. This is something where you're going to have to consider who you're shooting at, consider where you are when you start shooting, and find yourself an exit plan. But as you're going to see with the rest of the build, there's a method to the madness, and we're going to get on with it and see what other skills here that are chosen. For the next skill, I have Ingenious, cruiser gun traverse speed. It's pretty important because these guns do not turn quickly for being cruiser guns and light cruiser guns, and incoming splash damage. Both are very important for this build. Reason being, this cruiser has very weak armor, and it's not the most agile ship either, so the rudder shift isn't great on the ship either. But as you can see at the bottom, shows a warning indicator for the number of enemy ships currently targeting your ship with their main battery. That's pretty important for this build. Again, we just talked about this ship doesn't have an extremely fast rudder, so making moves like I showed you in the Wichita or anything like a Suzuya that has a agile build, you're not going to be able to make the same maneuvers as those ships, just because I believe this ship with this build has a 4.3 second rudder, if I remember right. We're going to look at that in a little bit, and that may change, I may be wrong. But for the build and how I have it, it's all really about speed. The rudder is just kind of like the icing on the cake. It makes it so that you can make those maneuvers if you have to, but straight line fast, that's what this ship is all about. That's why Ingenious is important, because you're going to be using this ship as either a flanker or a kiter. You're going to be kiting the enemy into your friendly ships, dragging them into the line of fire. As far as the other skills, Piercer, I don't recommend. The AP shells on this ship aren't fantastic to begin with, and I don't think should be relied upon unless you're firing at an enemy light cruiser. You might get some lucky large chunks of damage out of them. However, I would rather have Ingenious, so I have my guns turn faster, so that I have a warning indicator telling me when enemies are shooting at me, and so that splash damage does a little bit less damage to my ship over the span of the entirety of the game. As far as no-fly zone is concerned, I can see an argument for using no-fly zone, since this ship, I believe, is in the 30s. I think it's a 33 when it comes to the overall anti-aircraft rating. Not great at all. It's actually pretty weak when it comes to anti-air and fighting off aircraft. But I digress. Talk about that in a little bit. Burn it down. It's not even an option as far as this build is concerned because we are running SAP. Moving on down to full speed ahead. I would much rather have this than before it's too late. Reason why? Maximum cruiser speed, which is one of the things that we're really trying to stack upon. Also rudder shift time. It's pretty important for this build because the rudder isn't great, so getting it down as much as we can, especially since, as you can see, the inspirations are not rudder oriented. So having any kind of extra rudder skill with Francisco Membelli is pretty important. Again, before it's too late, not important, not going to use it. If you want to use it, you want to try it out, you be my guest, but you're going to lose quite a bit of speed and you're going to lose some rudder shift time, which is important for staying in the game. Velocious, maximum movement speed. Again, this is a speed build, so this cruiser is designed to both. So this cruiser is designed to flank the enemy, catch the enemy flank, make the enemy follow you into your friendlies, or kiting, or chasing down destroyers that think they can get away from you, which I can tell you from experience, that's not going to happen. Sponge, I definitely have never used Sponge with this build. I could see why you may. However, again, for the particular build, the gameplay that you're going to see, the speed is what I focused on. As far as behind the curtain, that skill is lost if you pick that skill for this commander and this particular ship, since this ship does not have a running smoke screen. If it were a different ship or it had a smoke screen, I could see why you would use that, but again, Velocious is much more important. The next skill I chose is Steer Clear, so improved rudder shift time and steering gear repair time. I haven't had too much experience with having the rudder knocked out in the ship, but it's always nice to have that in your back pocket. And again, we're just stacking onto that rudder shift time. As far as the other abilities, you could use Acoustic Chamber. This ship does have sonar. However, for keeping your ship in the game and alive and dealing damage, I would much prefer the rudder shift time. That way, if I need to make a sudden maneuver and avoid enemy shells, especially at distance, it's still a possibility rather than a 6, 7, or 8 second rudder time that's going to almost guarantee that I'm going to get hit by battleship or cruiser shells. For the legendary choice I made is Fully Packed. Cooldown for all consumables, -2%. Consumable charges, +1. And then cooldown time for all consumables, -30%. When you are 2 kilometers, at least for his current level, from allied ships. This is pretty important for being able to keep enemy fighters away from you. By the book could be used because that you see that special effect incoming damage for cruisers, but again, -20% is great, but it's only active when you're next to allied ships. So if you're not next to any friends, it's kind of wasted. The other two skills are fine. Damage control party duration, that's great. However, I'd rather have extra consumables. My ship, my choice. It's what I'm going to feel more comfortable in using. And I would say throughout my career in World of Warships, using Fully Packed, especially on cruisers like this that use aircraft to fight off enemy aircraft or to spot or have sonar, it's much more important. As for inspirations are concerned, Karl von Mueller. This is where you're going to see this is a little bit different than my normal agile build. This is where I'm going for speed. He has the ability Hardy, maximum cruiser speed plus 3.4%. As you can see, he's not maxed out, so this could get better. 15.2 for Karl von Mueller, adding to the speed of the ship, which is already pretty fast, just base without any commander. And then for the second inspiration, Bruce Fraser, make haste movement speed, maximum movement speed, increased by 2.4%. So This is a build where I have chosen not to stack onto the rudder speed. I have chosen to stack onto the movement speed, the overall speed of the ship. This is extremely important for this particular ship because it is naturally so fast. As far as the upgrades are concerned, the first mod I chose is Aiming Systems Mod 1, improving your main battery dispersion, torpedo launcher traverse speed, and not so importantly, secondary battery firing range and dispersion. That really doesn't matter. You could argue that you may want to use main battery mod 2 to increase your main battery traverse speed. However, I want to get those torpedo launchers around in an emergency, so that's what I've chosen. For the second mod, steering gears mod 2, rudder shift time, stacking on to the agility of the ship and making that rudder turn a bit faster than it normally would. You could argue propulsion mod 2 is a choice that you could make because this ship is so fast in order to stop, start, what have you. However, I would rather have that rudder in my back pocket should I need it. I feel like the closer you get, the less that propulsion mod is actually useful in combat, whereas the steering gears mod and getting that rudder over is much more important, especially with a ship that has torpedoes, and this ship does. As you can see, I have chosen to use the artillery mod in order to install SAP shells. Without the SAP shells, you're looking at a little bit faster of a reload time, half a second, which overall in the entirety of the match is quite a bit of time. But when you see the shell damage of these SAPs, you'll see why. So, survivability of the ship, 29,700 hit points with armor that is basically tissue paper. So don't try to tank anything unless it's destroyer shells. And honestly, there are some destroyers out there that have relatively large guns, and you still won't want to show side to them because they'll just citadel you with AP. Just something to keep in mind. For the artillery, this is where it's at. 4x2 152 millimeter guns, 14 kilometer range, 7.6 second reload time, 20 second 180 turn time, which is not great, but once you get to those sap shells, 3,850 damage. You can see where the AP is, 3,200. That's fine if you catch somebody off guard. However, those SAP shells, they can pen almost any armor, basically. Given if something's angled enough, it'll bounce, sure. However, superstructure, doing damage to superstructure, destroyers, light cruisers, that SAP damage is going to hurt big time. I'm not sure if you've ever been on the receiving end of SAP shells, but they're not fun to deal with no matter what you're in. As far as the torpedoes are concerned, 2x3, not a great amount of torpedoes. However, with a maximum damage of 13,000 damage, over 13,000 damage, and a torp range of 12 kilometers, these torps are decent. The only downside being that torpedo speed. I can almost outrun these torpedoes in this ship the way it's built. So that's something to consider. If you are close to an enemy and you're doing a torpedo run, you definitely want to get as close as you can before you send them so they don't get dodged because they're so slow. As far as the AA is concerned, as you can see, it is 33. It's pretty rough. It's pretty low. Enemies can harass you and stay above you for a little longer than you might be comfortable with. However, that is what that catapult fighter is for, and why fully packed is a little bit more important on this ship than running the other legendary ability. Having that fighter to supplement your AA and get bomber and destroyer groups away from your ship as quickly as possible is pretty important, but your speed and your maneuverability will also help you in that endeavor. Maneuverability. This is where it's at. Maximum speed, natural speed, not with a engine boost, 43.3 knots. That is incredible. You can chase down just about any destroyer at tier 5, whether they're using engine boost or not. Turning circle of 710, which isn't bad, but you'll notice when you look at the ship in game, it's rather long, so you still got to be careful when making maneuvers near islands, and a rudder shift time of 4.3 seconds. Not bad at all. Not great, not bad. It's definitely a ship where speed is your mainstay, and the rudder shift is just the added bonus. As far as concealment is concerned in this ship, it's not bad at all at 9.9. It is a relatively small cruiser. It is pretty lightly armored, so that's a good thing, having that low detectability. And detectability while firing in smoke, should your friends be able to lay a smoke screen for you, is pretty decent as well. It's still something that you're going to have to maintain, keeping your eye on the enemy's range from you. However, that is a second perk of having a catapult fighter, is if you're in that smoke, your friend's in that smoke, you can just launch your catapult fighter, and that fighter will definitely spot if a cruiser or a battleship is 4.7 away from you or closer, so that you don't give yourself away. As far as the armor is concerned, as you can see, it's basically destroyer armor, especially in the nose and in the tail of the ship. When it comes to right along the side where your torpedo protection is, and that's only 7%, so I wouldn't rely on that, it's decent. However, you will still need a decent angle in order to bounce certain shells, say 152 millimeter and up. As you can see in that yellow section, it says can cause any AP shell to ricochet at appropriate angles, and can resist 203. But again, that's at appropriate angles. That's not full side on or slightly angled. They will still penetrate you, and they will still do full damage to your extremely light cruiser that only has 29,000 hit points. As far as the aft is concerned, it's much the same story. You're going to have to be very careful when kiting, because this ship has such a soft rear. And as you can see, it is rounded at the rear, but that's not necessarily going to deflect a lot of shells. It's still going to allow shells to penetrate and do a lot of damage to your ship. Now, as you can see, the citadel of the ship is fairly low in the water. However, it does stick above the waterline slightly. It's something to consider when engaging any ship in-game, even destroyers that are loading AP and happen to have a commander that has a commander that specializes in AP penetration, AP damage. You are going to expose yourself to a lot of damage. Something to think of. Now, this ship, I did build it with the intention of chasing down destroyers, so that's its mainstay. As you could see in the nose, beyond that light blue armor, there are orange plates that cover the corners of the citadel. I wouldn't necessarily rely on those, but as long as you are almost fully nose on to a target, especially if it's a target with low caliber guns, they will do minimal damage without penetrating your citadel. Jumping on over to gameplay of the Duca. This ship is interesting to say the least. Maybe I'll do a closer look on it, but for now, we'll just talk about its characteristics in-game, and in this game in particular. As you can see, I do have sonar, I do have an aircraft, and with those 12-kilometer torpedoes, I tend to send them almost right away. Generally, I will try to get just a little bit closer to the enemy as soon as the match starts before I'll send them, just in case the enemy happens to lag at starting their engines right at the beginning of the match, and my torpedoes should happen to range out before they get to them. As you could see, I have my division mate Tater right behind me and another Duca, and we are pushing this side. I'm fairly certain he has a similar build to the build I have. It's just not completely the same. I don't think he chose to build it as a speed primary build. I'd have to ask him exactly how he built his. However, I'm fairly certain he's using Francisco Membelli as well. Taking fire from the smoke screen, thanks to the enemy spotting me. At this point, we are in a situation where we've already made our major push into the enemy, which is kind of the whole point of the ship. Enemy Exeter with fairly large guns is taking shots at me. However, I am lucking out a little bit here, and he is shooting HE at me, which is going to do a decent amount of damage, but it's not going to get anywhere near my citadel.
Torpedoes to port.
Unfortunately for me, this push is exposing my side to the enemy Pensacola, who has 203s. So I got to start thinking about making maneuvers to get angle away from both the Exeter and the Pensacola. Me continuing to go straight south is going to put myself in a situation to just essentially die before I'm able to do any reasonable amount of damage. So now, realistically, I only have a couple options open to me. One, I can continue on this course and make my push as best I can, trying to get rid of the Exeter, or I can turn and try to get away from the two ships that are trying to fire at me. I choose to push and try to get rid of this Exeter, at the same time, unfortunately, exposing myself to the cruiser in the middle. Enemy Pensacola has my side here, so I'm going to try to get as many shells over that hill and try to do as much damage as I can before he essentially gets rid of me, is my train of thought here. As far as I can tell, I'm already in a lick of trouble. I have enemy aircraft harassing me, and I have the enemy Pensacola focusing me. I don't blame him for making that choice. However, staying fully side on to my ship, probably not the best idea in something like the Pensacola, since the Pensacola is fairly lightly armored for a ship with those caliber guns as well. It's certainly not a ship that I would want to show full broadside to enemy cruisers in any regard for any length of time. Luckily, my buddy Tate here makes a push towards him to get him off my back. And now the Pensacola really doesn't have much of a choice other than to return fire at Tater, which gives me the opportunity to push back up, get over to Tater to support him in his push, and get back into the fight. Unfortunately, that turn to get myself away from the Exeter and the Pensacola placed me square into an island and put me out of the fight for a little bit. However, with this ship's speed, that's not going to be a problem for long. I will be back over where the fight is in no time at all, supporting my teammates and consolidating our AA, since the Duca's AA is just god-awful. But at least if I get over there next to Tater, our two AAs can work in tandem in shooting down enemy aircraft. As far as the aircraft carrier player is concerned, I'm sure he wasn't too concerned with losing aircraft to the anti-aircraft of one Duca d'Aosta during the match. However, both of us together, using our aircraft back-to-back, is going to make a difference in keeping those aircraft at bay. Enemy Fiji spotted out in the open, not looking at us and sitting still, so I'm going to start taking shots at that target of opportunity in order to get guns off the board and to support our team on the other side. We're already in the enemy flag, which is good for our team. Their team is down on boats anyway, but this ensures that if we start losing boats, we're still going to hold that point lead. As you can see, enemy aircraft is still harassing me, which I don't blame that player for doing so. I don't have a lot of health left to deal with taking damage. Enemy Dallas is also focusing fire on my position. I'm going to use my rudder and my speed to my advantage while trying to get rid of those guns and that damage that could potentially get rid of me before I'm able to make sure that Tater has the support that he needs. Now, 3 or 4 solid HE shots hitting me could easily take me out of the game, so at this point I do have to be cautious and stay at arm's length when engaging the enemy. Enemy aircraft carrier coming in to drop torpedoes at me, but this ship, even though it has a 4-second rudder, is still plenty fast enough to avoid aircraft torpedoes. Those torpedoes are just as slow as the torpedoes on the Duca. Here is an example of just how important the speed on the ship is, because I think if I were any slower, that torpedo right there probably would have hit me and killed me. But I was able to outrun it, at least for a little bit, in order to get my rudder over. Enemy Boise pushing into 1 battleship, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer. Now, normally I would say that's a ridiculous thought to have to try to push into, but at this point of the game, I don't think the Boise had much choice. This is just, last-ditch effort to get shells on target and get some experience before your team loses, unfortunately. Now here is where I am going to try to do my best to support my team with the health that I have remaining. So I'm going to come over to the Fuso that is getting harassed by aircraft, consolidate my anti-aircraft, and launch my catapult fighter in order to combat those enemy aircraft. This is also going to help me in the long run, should the match run long, to ensure that any other enemy air groups that come our way, whether they be bombers or torpedo planes, they are a lot weaker when they come back over here, so I'm not dealing with a whole group of aircraft at full strength. As far as this match is concerned and how it unfolded, as soon as the enemy was unable to stop Tater and my push, they were fairly doomed to loss. Reason being, they exposed their entire flank to 2 ships that are specialized in attacking the flanks of enemies. They're fast, they're fairly maneuverable, and especially with these ships, they have aircraft, they have catapult aircraft, and they have sonar, which is fairly rare when it comes to Italian cruisers. So pushing into enemy destroyers and pushing into enemy cruisers that have torpedoes, it makes making that push much safer for ships like this. A class of ship that I even like to consider a heavy destroyer, really. And so that's the match. And as you can see, it's a fairly easy victory for this ship and this team. When looking back at the match now, it's easy to see that there was a lot of things that I probably should have done different, one of which, from the very beginning, was not pushing straight into 2 enemy cruisers and just losing a ton of my health pool, making it more difficult for me later, mid and end game, to actually make a decent push into the enemy instead of staying at arm's length, not being able to stay in the capture zone. There's stuff that that first engagement made it impossible for me to do later. So it's just something to consider when looking at gameplay that you've played. And I'm talking to you, the viewer. It's something to consider when you play a match, think back on it if you can't record, of what you could possibly do better next time. Because chances are you're using a ship and you are probably going to use it again, especially if it's premium, in order to improve how you play the game. And I would say this is a good example of me looking back at a match and realizing that there's quite a few things that I could have done differently that would have improved my role in that match. Well, that's it for me in this particular video. If you have any questions, comments, critiques, leave it in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, share with an enemy, spread the awareness for my videos. I plan on doing a 100 subscriber giveaway, and we're getting pretty close, so any support that you can throw my way is much appreciated. Anyway, I'm Buckshot Bucky. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.